Good? All right, here we go, folks. So we already talked in this class about carpetbaggers, scalawags, and the 15th Amendment, but I continually managed to have a little bit of technical trouble with this thing, so I'm going to go ahead and discuss that also again. So what a carpetbagger is somebody who came down from the north, and it was generally considered that they came down to take advantage of the Southerners, that they came down to kind of rip them off, these people that were in a destitute sort of a situation. I mean, they didn't have any money, they didn't have, their economy was wrecked, probably their homes were wrecked, undoubtedly they lost some male relatives in their family. The South was really, really hurting. And these guys came down to do business. Now they had a little cash in the pocket. These are, in some cases, the same kind of guys that might have been those war profiteers. So money they got, and they see this as a great opportunity. You know, hey, you've just about lost your farm. I'll buy it from you at next to nothing. So the Southerners particularly saw carpetbaggers as people who came down to take advantage of it. Now, of course, there were people who came down just to do business. Here was an opportunity to rebuild the South. Southern cities had been bombed. You know, southern bridges and dams and dikes and roads all needed to be rebuilt. And so these guys said, this is just the place where you can get yourself some employment. But other ones did come down to take advantage. Dan, you got a question, buddy? No, I was just going to ask you. All right, scalawags. Scalawags were Southerners who immediately went to work with the North again. And it's kind of a funny thing. Even today, we see, like, you know, they're removing those Confederate statues and all. And I told you guys point of view when we talked about how the South had lost the war so desperately that it still stays with some people. It's almost as if the South, the old Confederate hardline, bless you, really went out of their way to make sure that we didn't get over this thing. Bless you again. Really didn't get over this thing. I mean, so here we are. I mean, it ended in 1865. It's 2021, and I always think it's kind of a bizarre thing to see people, you know, racing around with Confederate flags. The one that cracks me up is particularly if they're racing around with Confederate flags in Wisconsin. Wasn't exactly a Confederate state, you know. I understand some of the ideas behind the Confederacy might be appealing to people. That's not the slavery thing. That's like the rights of states and such. But still, I think that's just kind of the wrong emblem. That'd be like saying, you know, I really like efficiency, so I'm going to carry around the Nazi flag because I like efficient government. Well, it stood for a little bit more than that, so probably a bad idea. That's not really what you're standing for. Anyway, so scalawags, these Southerners that immediately went to work with the North because there were some Southerners who said, look, we lost. It's over. There's no way for us to rebuild this Confederacy. We're Americans. That's what's going to happen for the rest of our lives. The most famous of these was James Longstreet. And James Longstreet had been one of Robert E. Lee's corps commanders. Remember, there was Stonewall Jackson, there was A.P. Hill, and then there was James Longstreet. And as soon as the war was over, James Longstreet immediately said, okay, we're Americans, let's go to work. Some of the people had a better sense of what should go on after this. Now, again, clearly the South was racist. Clearly the South, had broken away, and their slave economy was a horrible thing. Some of the people did try to get past it. One of the most interesting stories I've ever heard was about one of the churches in the city of Richmond. This is where all the former Confederate leaders went to church. And somebody decided they were going to cause a little trouble here. They were going to cause an uproar. So when it came time for communion, they sent a black man in who walked down through all these Confederate leaders and knelt down at the communion rail. And there was a hush, like, One person got up and went forward and knelt down beside it. Robert E. Lee. Kind of an amazing thing, but again, that was another person that it's over. It's time to get back. Okay. The 15th Amendment says the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. What do you mean, buddy?
Is it really related? Is the South today still very racist compared to the North?
The South today is becoming less and less racist. More and more Northerners have moved down to the South. There is still some hardcore pockets of racism. On the other hand, there are hardcore pockets of racism in lots of different places. As I said, Milwaukee, Wisconsin is one of the most racially divided cities in the country. So we can't really throw stones. Right? Okay. But yes, there's some of that, much less than there even was, 35, 40 years ago. All right. So the 15th Amendment said, no, you cannot deny American citizens their right to vote. Because of race. Remember, race is Negro, Caucasian, Asian. That's your ethnic background. Color. Remember, there are people that come in different hues. So if you think, if I see Hamza, and if he's down in the old South, they might say, he doesn't quite look white. He must be black. Well, no, he's something else, but he might be judged on his color. So that's not good as far as voting is concerned. And previous condition of servitude. They can't be locked out from voting because they used to be slaves. It was ratified in 1870. Ratified means officially accepted by both houses of Congress and then officially accepted by the 3/4 of the state governments. Now, some southern states, when the 14th Amendment came around, they said, no, we'll take the penalty. Remember that one said, if you don't let them vote, you can't count them for making congressmen? Well, some of the southern states said, fine, we just have fewer congressmen, but we are not letting them vote. 15th Amendment said, you just don't have a choice. You have to let them vote. They are citizens of the United States. The presidents. Yeah, boss.
Could you go back a slide real quick?
Why?
I was trying to write down the quote.
It's just the 15th Amendment. You can Google 15th Amendment. It'll pop right up.
All right.
Okay. Lincoln was dead. Andrew Jackson wasn't elected on his own. Remember, Grant was loved. He was respected, but he ran such a corrupt administration. See, she's friendly. She waves to me. She says,
get out of the way. Get out of the way. Oh, no, that was a sideways wave, Mr. Holman. That was a really friendly, get out of the way.
How are we doing at home? Everybody having a good time? Are you studying for exams? You know which exam you should study for? The history exam. I hear it's going to be long and difficult. I hear many of the children will cry and fill up my coffee mug with student tears. Sounds like a delightful experience for one of us.
It's going to be fun as long as there isn't an essay.
I like watching
Gus
children
insists
cry.
we have an essay, so if there's an essay on it, remember that was Gus.
I know I'm gonna cry during this.
All right, here we go.
I'm gonna cry during that.
I've run out of time.
No, I'm gonna cry during that. I'm really anxious.
Okay, hate groups grew. And who did they decide they wanted to focus their hate on? Who were they going to resent? Who were they going to blame for all of their suffering? The African Americans and the immigrants. It's those new people coming in, those foreigners. That's what's keeping us down. It's those African Americans. If they hadn't have been here, we wouldn't have had this war. Dad wouldn't have died. The plantation wouldn't have been burned. And again, the stupidity of that is just astounding. When you think about it, to blame the Africans that were brought over here, or to blame the descendants of the Africans that were brought over here, didn't come voluntarily. They were chained and stuck in the belly of a ship and sold like they were cattle. But, they needed somebody to blame, which knows that. Remember, the Ku Klux Klan is not a friendly group. They are a terrorist group. And anytime you hear people talking about terrorists, it's not a difference of opinion. I mean, there may be a difference of opinion, but terrorists mean they are there to scare people so badly, to do things which are so atrocious and frightening that their enemies will not pursue the course that they don't want them to do. So if we don't want you to, have a tax, if we write letters to, the newspaper and get them published, if we get our own YouTube channel and say essays or something, that's one thing. If instead we go blow up the federal building in Oklahoma City, as a guy named Timothy McVeigh did, which also blew up a daycare center, that's another thing. That's a terrorism thing. That's not having an argument. That's trying to make people so afraid of they're doing what you don't want them to do that they won't do it. Okay. What else have we got here? The old guard takes over. And the old guard, by that means the people that used to be in charge. The folks that were the top dogs in the Confederacy, they now work themselves into those state governments. They have the positions of authority and they start working on those black codes. They're also trying to make it so they can find a way that the black people, the African Americans, cannot use their voting rights, because if they can keep them down politically. Now, we'll allow you to vote, but one of the things they did was they said, well, there's a poll tax. Now, the poll, P-O-L-L, that's the place where people vote. You go to your polling place. If you've ever been with your parents, it could be a school oftentimes, or maybe the city hall. So you go there, and that's the polling place. That's the poll where people actually vote. And these old ex-Confederates that were now in charge said, geez, it's expensive to have these places to vote, so we got to put a little tax on this. Now, it doesn't matter how big the tax is. You're talking about people who were in slavery just a couple of years ago. They don't have any money. So the white people, or at least some of the white people, could vote. Almost none of the black people can vote. Remember, maybe they've gotten rid of the vote for the ex-Confederate soldiers. Maybe they've narrowed down the white people who can, but some of them still can. Then you go over to the black people and say they can vote, but we put this poll tax on and they can't really afford to, so they don't. All right, what else? We got to keep a decent education away from African Americans, because again, if you're going to keep people down, it's very important that you do not allow them to become educated, because education is the key to freedom. We're done with lunch number 7. Okay, so no decent education for the African Americans. Then, of course, the Ku Klux Klan grew. It's a really interesting thing. The Klan no longer is an effective anything. I think I told you before, if there are 1,000 members of the Klan, 700 of them are FBI agents. It's so infiltrated, the government knows what's going on inside the Klan. It's not really an effective terrorist organization anymore. But it's come and gone a number of times when there have been racial problems and hard times in the country. And it's really interesting. You ever heard of the movie The Birth of a Nation?
No.
The Birth of a Nation was the first big motion picture, motion picture, Birth of a Nation. And it's really interesting. This is the 1900s, maybe about 20 teens. And what happens is, the general plot is that it's down south, and these people are nice little wonderful people, and then they're threatened by these horrible Negroes. And the final scene of The Birth of a Nation, this first big major motion picture, is the Klan to the rescue. And it's got all the guys in the sheets and everything coming over to make sure that this poor white family, which is being attacked by these black people stomping at the door, is safe. And that's 50 years after the Civil War was over. So this has come and gone a few times in our nation's history. What did it all lead to? It led to 2 things. The most obvious one is segregation. I mean, segregation is kind of an amazing thing for us to think about, because we live in a world where people are pretty generally accepted. And you take a look, a separate water fountain for colored people. There'd be a water fountain somewhere else that says whites only. This is for colored only. And it makes the same way. White person couldn't use this water fountain. Black person couldn't use the other one. We got to keep them segregated. Got to keep them separated. A white waiting room at the bus station. Now, black people, you go around the back, you wait over in that room. White people, you wait in this room. Notice here we are, black people on the back of the bus. You sit back with the fumes and the nastiness, and we'll let the white people sit up front. Here's a theater. We don't mix in public. This is a black theater. Now, sometimes there would be theaters where the bottom would be for the white people and they might put black people up in the balcony, but they weren't going to mix them. This is one I'd never seen before. I was looking for a few pictures. It says Lewis Mountain, it's a park, Lewis Mountain Negro area. Coffee shop and cottages, campground, picnic ground, entrance here. So Negroes, you come in this part of the park. Here are your cabins. Here's your coffee shop. You stay away from the other part of the park, which is for white people. So it's kind of an amazing thing. You have them separated. Of course, the law says that the black people can do certain things. It's going to take some years before we get some of those decisions, Plessy versus Ferguson or Brown versus the Board of Education, where they say separate isn't equal, and you can't have just black schools and white schools. They have to have the same kind of opportunities. Well, it's going to be a long time before you have that. What you do have is you have people come down south and say, okay, there is a chance of getting ahead down in the south. I mean, think about it. You got all these people that are looking for work, labor. That's big for business. That's big for manufacturing. We got workers down there. Now, let's think about this. I'm going to be a really nice guy. I'm going to go down to, I'll say I'm going down to Athens, Georgia, deep in the old Confederacy to open up a factory. And I've heard that there are some racial problems. There's this segregation thing down south. So I want to avoid that. I'm going to be really fair. I take a look at how Athens, Georgia is divided. And it just so happens that the population is 50% white and 50% black. I'm just making that number up just because it's easy to work with. So the town is 50% white, 50% black. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this factory works. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a factory which has one wing goes out in that direction, one wing goes out in the other direction, and it brings stuff here to the center where it gets shipped. I'm going to hire 50% of my employees white, and I'm going to put them all over there so they don't have to deal with the black people. And I'm going to hire the other 50%, that's what the town is, 50-50, black, and I'm going to put them over there so they don't have to deal with the white people. And all they have to do is finish it up and then deliver it to the center. Shouldn't be a problem. But of course, with segregation, you get that idea again about, wait a minute, why do these black people have an opportunity? Okay, it's 50% white, 50% black, but suppose, here comes Hugh Ray Billy Bob and he says, yeah, my cousin Virgil, he ain't got him a job. He lost his job and he needs a job. I, being this factory owner who's trying to keep things fair, say, well, I hire 50% white guys and 50% black guys. And, if a job opens up over here in the white section, I'll certainly consider it. Well, that ain't fair. How come some of them black folk have jobs and my cousin Hugh Ray don't have a job? That ain't right. So maybe one of the black people gets hurt so that there's an opening for a job. But I'm still not going to hire because I'm going to hire another black person because I'm trying to keep it 50-50. What happens if there turns out to be a fight in the middle? What happens if they're so upset the Klan comes over and burns part of my factory? What am I going to do? Am I going to rebuild in Athens, Georgia? No. Is the next person that's thinking about opening a business going to come down south to open it up? No. What this did was racial unrest made sure that industry stayed away. We're not going to open businesses down in the south. And since industry stayed away in the age of industry, prosperity stayed away. Sherman had gone through the south and wrecked the economy for 100 years. That was his goal, and he was successful, but he was helped a lot along the way by the racial segregation because that made it unsafe to bring the business down there. It made it very difficult to get along in the South economically. Yes, boss.
What does prosperity mean?
Prosperity means good times. Everybody's making money. Can I tap it?
Sure.
Okay. Something else we have to throw in here is Seward's folly. William Seward was the Secretary of State. In 1867, he negotiated with the country of Russia that had colonized Alaska. And the United States bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. And people call this Seward's folly. Folly is something foolish. Because it was said, we just bought a big lump of ice, a large lump of ice. I'm like, what in the world do we want Alaska for? We did pretty well with buying stuff. Like, we bought California and then they had the California gold rush. Well, we bought Alaska and then they had the Alaska gold rush. 1896, so about 30 years later, 29 years later, gold was discovered in the Klondike. What's a Klondike, Sawyer?
Isn't it like an
Yes.
Ice cream bar.
Yeah, like those ice
Yeah.
cream bars.
It's an ice cream bar.
It's not a bar, it's a square.
What do you get in a Klondike bar?
A square.
Heaven.
I'm gold. For some reason I was thinking of snow.
You get the ice cream, so if you bite into it, it's like treasure inside.
Hey!
That's why it's a Klondike bar. Yeah, I mean, it's cold, like the Klondike, like Alaska, but there's also treasure inside. There's the ice cream. Yes.
For some reason, when I think of ice into ice cream, I more think of snow cones.
Well, yeah, they're a little more truly ice. Yes, sir.
Wait, so did so did the US buy it for $7.2 million? Did they buy Alaska for $7.2 million?
We did. We bought Alaska for $7.2 million.
Isn't that pretty cheap for a full entire state?
It's really cheap because that is by far the largest of the United States. However, there's almost no population up there because it really is a large lump of ice. But it's got a lot of oil. That's been very nice. All right, here we go.
To Alaska one.
You can, of course, get fish
I went on a
and
cruise.
Eskimos, or more properly.
It was a Disney cruise.
It was so much fun.
All right, the two most important lessons of the year, as Annalise focuses in, the two most important lessons of the year. I know I've said these to you guys all year long till I'm blue in the face, but it's so important. The first thing is, when you are studying history, when you are dealing with peoples, when you are entering a negotiation, when you are trying to do business, when you are trying to have a conversation, when you're having an argument about something, you have to take off your blinders. Your way is not the only way to see things. I said at the start of the year, I've said it again, if I turned you guys into a bunch of little Mr. Homans, then I have failed horribly. I'm not trying to turn you into me. I have my own blinders. I realize that. You all should turn into the best possible yous. That's what we want. Not we just want you to think. But think about all the things that have an effect on how you see the world and realize that's simply not true for other people. I mean, let's just take something really, really easy. You will take somebody who is an atheist, has no religion. If they ever fast, which they probably don't, maybe it's because they want to lose a pound. Then let's take Catholics. Oftentimes they'll give something up for Lent. So they might fast a little bit or at least reduce their intake. Sometimes they'll have a couple other days of fasting that they choose to do. Let's take Muslims who then go on for Ramadan and go long periods of time fasting during the daylight hours. Those three people are going to have very different views of the world just based on that one tiny little experience of growing up in the influence of their religion and their experience with it. They will see things differently. And you have to realize that when you're talking to those people that you just think, oh, the only reason anybody ever gives up food is, to drop a pound. And you're speaking to a Muslim person who says, no, the reason people give up food is the glory of God. And we do this every season, for this reason. You're not having the same conversation because you're not seeing each other's points of view. All right, I just listed all kinds of things. This is one of my favorites. My wife was bitten by a dog a long time ago. She's not comfortable around dogs. And dog owners are like the funniest things ever because dog owners, I'm perfectly comfortable around dogs, but dog owners are the funniest things ever because they can never believe that their dog would bother anybody. I mean, usually what I'll say, and I've done this dozens of times when I'm walking with my wife, somebody will have a dog that's loose. Even a fairly large dog. And I will say as we approach, could you leash your dog, please? And the answer of a dog owner is always, she's okay. I'm not worried about the dog. I'm worried about my wife. See, we have a different point of view because of her experience having been bitten by a dog. So you see people, even on the simplest little things, can have just really varied views. And that's so important to remember. You do have blinders. You are seeing things as your own individuality and experiences have dictated, but other people, nobody on earth sees them exactly the same way. So that's one, take off your blinders. And then the other one is where your rights come from. So important. This is the American system of government. You had the European system back then, the divine right of kings. Remember, that was the idea God gave to the king. God gave to the king all the rights, all of them, everything. And he could give or take, they'd all be privileges because nobody had any rights. He could give or take privileges as he saw fit. Now, this is really important because remember, when that kind of a system of government was on, if you argued with the king, you were arguing with God because God chose that person to be the one and only king, and you had to obey that person. Otherwise, you were disobeying God. So this is huge. Then along came the American system of government, the idea of natural rights. Now, remember, we didn't invent this. We took what were some general ideas from a Frenchman named Montesquieu and a Brit named John Locke. And we took these and we put them together and formed the first government like this, which said God gave to each human being certain rights. We call those natural rights. Remember, they occur in a state of nature. That means if there's no government, we're just existing in the world. Well, the government didn't give you permission to live. Joe Biden didn't say, okay, Gus can live one more day and sign a letter yesterday so you can have today. No, life didn't come from the government. Life came from God. You have liberty. If there was no government, you could do whatever you wanted to. I could walk over and slap Daniel. I could walk over and slap him again. I could get him. I could punch him.
No, don't.
I could hit him with a chair. I could stab him with a pencil. I could put his face right through the wall. No, seriously. Let me just enjoy this. I would never do that. Anyway, so God gave each human being rights. And what do? If we wish to have a government, then we give up some of our rights in exchange for the protection of government. And you remember, think of any law we have, any law that comes from government, like the fact that it's 15 miles an hour in a school zone. We each give up our right to drive really quickly in exchange for the safety for all of the children. If you think of something else, obviously, it's against the law to steal things from somebody's house. Well, that's because we don't want anybody to steal things from our houses. So we give up our right to go steal things from other people's houses in exchange for the protection of law, in exchange for the government saying, we all agree not to do this. Then you have these rights, life, liberty, and property, and the only way they can be taken away is through due process of law. DUE, due process of law. And we've talked about some of these things. You have the right as an American to be told what crime you're being charged with. So Helen, you're being charged with robbing a liquor store. All right, so she's told that. Then she's brought to trial. She has a right to face her accusers because Emily said she saw her robbing the liquor store. Well, then Helen gets a right to have either Helen can or her attorney can ask Emily questions, can see if they can poke holes in her story to prove that Helen is not in fact guilty. She has a right to have somebody present to help her out, to have a counsel. And also she gets to be tried by a jury. It's not just going to be a judge appointed by the government that's going to do what the government tells him or her to do. It's going to be a group of peers. Remember, peers P-E-E-R-S. Peers are people's equals. So for the average American, that's just anybody. Back in Britain, the time we were talking about, their society was so divided. You had peasants, which was almost everybody, just commoners. Then you had nobles. Nobles were people with titles that had land and had power. And then, of course, you had royals. And there was just one more group. Anybody know what the other group would be?
King.
That's royal. That's royal.
No.
You're so close. The church people. The church people. Okay. The
Were they-
clergy. What?
Were they equal to the royals or above?
Well, that's a really good question. To the royals, they would be subservient in all matters except purely religion. I mean, they were still citizens of the country, so the king would be in charge. But in matters of pure religion, it would be the religious people. One of those Bible things, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's and unto God what's God's. So if the government's in charge of that, they get to be in charge of that. But if the church is in charge of this, then the clergy gets to be in charge. Okay. Those are the two most important lessons. I cannot stress enough that since they are the two most important lessons, you might see them on your exam. Can
I
possibly
wonder.
do that based on a true false or a multiple choice? The answer would be
Yes.
no.
Oh.
You're gonna have to do some explaining there, so I hope you got that all down pat. All right.
Yay. He's not gonna put on my shirt. That's so exciting.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you go to the 15 amendment slide?
Go to the 15th amendment slide.
Just like write down what amount we need, like, don't write it down.
Okay, okay, whoa. We're not having 12 conversations. Yes, ma'am.
So on the exam, like when we answer the thing about the rights, are we gonna be able to like draw the charts?
If I ask you to explain it to me in English, then I just don't want the chart. You can draw the chart. Did I tell you guys about bringing a piece of scratch paper? Bring a piece of scratch paper, because you guys are forever doing things like, I need something to remind me of the words, like Tanstaffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That's an economic one. So you might do that with the names of the presidents or something, have your own little, well, don't write it on the test, write it on a piece of scratch paper. Let me write down the dates right fast when I sit down. Now you have those. Let me, work out what I'm going to say in this conversation about rights. So let me draw my diagrams. Now I can kind of turn that into English looking at the diagrams, but maybe it doesn't belong on a test paper, but you can put it on a scratch paper so that you can use that as a guide. Yes, sir.
Can we like have for math, we have like a card that we can
No.
use?
Okay?
Wait.
Yes, sir.
So easy then. Wait, so we can get a piece
No, we're not starting side conversations. What?
So we can get a piece of paper, write the answers and come to school.
No, you have to
Yes,
write-
and then I will say you're cheating in your exam and give you a 0.
you
Or
have
you
to
could
write
bring
it
a
in.
blank piece of scratch paper and use that.
Oh, just bring it. Yeah. Or
You have to write.
I'm
it
sure
as
I
you
could
sit
bring a
down.
lot of paper in, but just take one.
You have to sit down and take it.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Okay, just stretching. All right. You may shut that down.